Hey everyone, Sycra here. So today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different where I'm going to be talking about an illustration I've done. So it's kind of like a play-by-play where I do a voice narration instead of just putting on music. And you may notice that the Photoshop I'm using isn't the usual CS3 that I tend to use. It's CS6. And I'm sure I'm going to get asked about the color wheel. That's a painter's wheel. I believe it's the Len White painter's wheel. And I have a link on where to download that in the resources section of my website, www.sycra.net. And let's just go ahead and talk about what's going on right now. So I had this idea. I don't know if it's a good idea or not, but it's an idea nonetheless, of two people fighting, and one of them has the power to create life, and the other has the power to destroy or decay life. So that was the initial idea, and then I did a quick thumbnail sketch before doing this image, so I have a general sense. It's not one of the paintings where I started with scribbles and have no idea where I'm going. I kind of have an idea where I'm going. And I figure that the power comes out through touch. So one of the people who can create is touching the ground, which is going to create life. The other one's touching the ground, which is going to, I don't know, crack the ground or something. So I'm working with values here, and it's really how I prefer to work, just because I don't want to get confused by colors. For a short time, I was actually just starting things pure color, and what I found when I was doing that is actually I'd come up with some more interesting color choices. So it's something I still might do where I just go straight to color, but I think when I'm thinking a lot, I would rather stay in black and white because it's something I'm safe with. What I mean by that is, for this particular piece I'm doing, there's no reference, so I'm making it all up in terms of the lighting and the anatomy and proportions and all that. So there's a lot of thinking. Anytime I put down any brush mark, I'm trying to think, where's the light coming from? And if you notice before, I'd put like a little arrow in the corner, and that's just pointing out where the light source is, and that's pretty much just so I remember. And I flipped the image, so right now the light is coming from the top left, but before it was the top right. What else? I figure her face is too small, so I just made that bigger. It's one of the beauties of digital painting, is that you can quickly make those kinds of adjustments. And one of the things I wanted to do with this is give each character their own values, where one is lighter and one is darker. And I'm going to do the same thing with color, just to separate them a bit. What else? Things are pretty rough right now. I'm actually just using a default round Photoshop brush, so even though I'm using CS6, I'm not really taking advantage of things that CS6 offers. Just because, I don't know, I use that brush a lot lately, and I really like it. It's in, that brush goes way back, just, the hard round. I think opacity and flow are set to transfer. And I made videos showing exactly how I go about doing that. So I'm not going to go over that too much here. I think, later on I will experiment with some other brushes, but this is pretty much my first painting using CS6, and maybe I can talk a bit about what I like about it and what I don't. Overall, I really like it. It tends to actually be faster in some cases. Where it does slow down is I was actually experimenting a bit with different brushes, and I downloaded a set by who was it? I think it was Anthony Jones, and yeah, I tried out some of those brushes, and there was a bit of lag where I put down the mark on my tablet, and then, you know, like maybe half a second later the stroke appears, or a second later. So it wasn't terrible, but it does feel a bit weird when you're used to things happening immediately and then they don't. So yeah, so here I'm just adding those cracks in the ground, and I really don't like the darker character's face right now. Just it's flat and it's not working. So everything I'm doing with this is really with the light source in mind. Just trying to think what the forms are. And here I'm working a bit more in the background. Initially, I had more of a square composition. I felt it wasn't enough room for the character, so I made it a vertical rectangle shape. So here I'm adding more lights. I felt there's quite a bit in the dark and mid-tone range, but there wasn't much bright lights, and that's something you want to do in your images, have, you know, a good balance of darks and lights and midtones, and not, I mean, unless you're doing a high key or low key painting, which is, you know, low key is most everything is dark, and high key is everything's pretty light. Unless you're doing that, if you're doing like full values, then you want a good spread. So here, when I'm putting in the background shapes, I'm actually not putting them randomly. So I'm trying to create a flow to the image. What that means is your eye, when you look at the image, your eye goes around the whole picture, and it kind of follows lines. So there's like a triangle that's created between the hand on the ground that's lighting up, and then the top background distant tower thing. I don't know what it, like a mountain, whatever it is, that rock formation, and then the light of the darker character's hair creates this kind of triangle. And then there's a flow where if you look towards the left, there's like another mountain in the background, but it's pointing towards the character again. So your eye kind of stays within this whole middle region. And here I'm reworking the face. I didn't, as I said, I wasn't happy with it. I felt it didn't have form, so I'm liking this a lot more. It feels like it's a three-dimensional shape now. And, you know, if I was using reference, that would have been easier. And when I say I didn't use reference, I'm not trying to say it in, you know, like bragging, like, hey, I didn't use reference, I'm so cool. No. I would actually recommend to use reference. The reason I didn't use reference is I just didn't want to slow myself down at this point. And perhaps if I was going to take this image much further, I would try and find some reference. And the other reason I didn't use reference is just because the pose I was doing, I don't think there's a reference for that. It would be really difficult for me anyway to find a reference of this. And I mean, that's one of the good things about not being tied down to just copying an image, is that you can create stuff from your mind. And here what I've done is just brought in color balance. Now, I mentioned in my last video about using a palette, and because I've used palettes quite a bit, I've kind of internalized it in my mind. So what I like to do now is make a color balance adjustment layer. And right now I'm just painting on a new layer set to color mode, and I'm just putting in the color, and I'm going to reduce the opacity where it gets too strong. And here again I'm going into color balance. The great thing about color balance is you can change the highlight, midtone, and shadow. So you get a bit more variation than if you're just using a color mode with one color. And I like to have variation. It kind of gives a hint of things looking more realistic. Usually, the same thing with textures, right? When you have a lot of variation in texture, when you have subtle variation in value, when you have subtle variation in color, all that's going to help to make things look just a bit more believable. So here I'm adding like grass, because yeah, I guess that's my symbol for life, is that she's spreading some kind of grass. And here I'm changing the eyes. I felt the direction wasn't right, and this is something I think you need to be able to do, is to not be afraid if something's not working right. Even if you like it, it's a good idea to just change it. The beauty of digital is that you can just file save as if you like something, save it as something else, and then make whatever change. And if it doesn't work, you always have something to go back to. But the way I like to think more is that I want to be in control. I want to be in control of what I'm painting. So I don't want to be limited by, an accident. Like maybe I accidentally did a brush mark and hey, that looks cool, and or I drew an eye that looks good, and it's like, yeah, awesome, I like that. And then I get scared, and it's like I don't want to touch it because I did a good job. Yeah, I want to get out of that way of thinking, and just, if it doesn't suit the image, even if it looks good, just get rid of it. Because as an artist or illustrator or whatever you want to call yourself, you should be able to do that, right? You should be able to make a change and not be limited by accidents. And here I'm actually trying one of the different brushes, and this is in tool presets. It's a soft brush, and I'm playing around with color dodge texture brush, just seeing what they did, and it was okay. I mean, the soft brush works at softening things, but I went back to my same old default Photoshop hard round brush, and yeah, just correcting things as I go. It's pretty much near the end. I'm going to go through a phase where I just, play around with a lot of layers. I'm just making minor adjustments. I think I added a multiply layer just because the top left was a bit too light in values. Now I'm just duplicating layers, setting them to dodge and things just to bring out certain lights, but then I reduce the opacity, and that's it. So thanks for watching.